Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Hello, friends. How is everybody feeling today?
Hello, good.
Sun shining.
Sans,
good.
when this is being recorded, this is sans 2 nights of freeze. So hopefully everybody covered what was important to them.
We're lucky. I mean,
what did you say? It's
not
sans?
a late season free.
Like sans, like post.
Without freezing?
Post.
Oh, okay.
Can't you also use sans?
Got it.
Probably not. Whatever. I studied
No,
plants.
I just meant I didn't. Yeah, we just came off of 2 nights of.
But it's still early.
It was
We're
cold
recording
the
this.
last
For
2
some
nights.
reason, Alexis and I seem on the verge of fighting today, even though
Something's going
we're
on.
Not really.
I'm
really
here
like
for this
it.
kind of
I
energy.
Really
Yeah.
like it.
I think that we're just
Edgy.
too comfortable, and we've spent many a day together lately. And
it's
maybe
like
we're both,
when
maybe
you-
both feeling a little prickly today.
It's
the
springtime.
cold.
We're on edge. It's okay. We're on edge. It's springtime.
It
It's like
makes
when you
me
text
edgy.
somebody something and like it autocorrects and you're like, oh, I didn't mean that. And then the person like already responds back. You're like, oh, well, no, that's not good. And you're like, no, I know that's not good. And you go back and forth and you're just like, I'm not trying
I'm
to
not
fight.
mad, you're
like, I'm
mad.
in agreement with you. And
It's
yeah, you guys are in
agree.
agreement.
I've
And it's one
only
of those
ever
days.
I've only ever experienced this with people that I really care about, and so I'm leaning into it.
Aw.
Lean into it. I like it. I have a question. Speaking of leaning into it, and this is going to be a challenge for you guys, unless somebody else has a burning intro question, which you guys are so good at. You always nail that.
Oh.
But what's your guys' favorite springtime activity that does not involve plants? Because I don't want to hear about it. That does not involve plants.
I
don't
have
think
no
that's a
answers.
killer.
I don't know.
Your whole identity is not
Kind of
plants.
spring.
Okay, go.
Yes.
I'm here for it.
I enjoy basketball and the basketball tournament.
Ooh, yes,
Like, love it.
March, the madness that is March.
Love the madness. Love
Yes,
it. Bracket
yes.
busted very
I
quickly.
love that.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I was
Love
a
it.
little caught off guard by how much you love. And you're talking about mainly
Basketball?
college basketball, right?
Yes, I love
UK
basketball.
college basketball.
Jessica and I
Yes.
wanted to remain friends, so we've never played each other one-on-one in basketball because I
Yes.
already
We
know
talk
she
about
probably
it all the time.
she sets a mean pick. So yeah, and I'm aggressive at basketball, and I love to play it. I love to watch it. Yes,
I love
couple of
college
years ago-
basketball, college
Good one.
football,
Good one.
and I like NFL football.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you're not an NBA
Gordon.
fan.
You know, they just
college
kind of
basketball's
like
getting
flop
real close to the
around.
NBA. You know,
I love the NBA.
you do?
Yes.
No
Really?
kidding.
I
I
do.
would not have.
Who's
I
your
missed
team?
that.
I actually
Let's
have
hear
a really hard time following or watching college basketball now because they're not nearly as good. Like the
It's hard
thing
to go
about
back.
college basketball that's fun is that it's unpredictable because the people who are playing it are not universally as good.
Yes, there is
I
more
gotta know.
variability.
Who's your team?
I actually really don't particularly root for a team. The Memphis Grizzlies are really hard to root for. They're like probably the closest physically to this. Maybe the Pacers, again, kind of difficult to watch.
Mhm.
But I would say if I had to root for a team, and this is going to sound really stupid because they're like the best team this year, but it would be the Oklahoma Thunder because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from UK
Yeah,
plays
UK
for them.
connection. I like it.
I like them. I also like. I enjoy watching the Warriors because it's like a very different play style, or not different play style, but a really fun to watch play style. And yeah, the Grizzlies earlier this year were kind of fun. They were playing some different stuff.
We
But
are just
yeah.
learning so much about each other
Yeah.
because I would have never imagined that you would like NBA
Yeah,
basketball.
I rarely watch games, but I do watch a lot of like analysis and highlights and kind of keep up with the standings and that kind of stuff.
I'm sorry to all the baseball
learn
people who
something
were probably
completely
like,
new.
oh, I like baseball because that's the spring. Going to a baseball game, that is fun. Watching
Mhm.
baseball on TV,
Yeah, I like to watch baseball
not
in
really
person.
my
It's big
thing.
If you
fun.
want to cosplay your pastimes like it's still 1925, then go on and
Baseball.
do that.
Baseball's
But
it. On
the
lock.
rest of us.
So is that your
I'm just
springtime
teasing.
activity? Your favorite springtime activity, Brett, is NBA, not involving plants?
No.
No.
My favorite
I
springtime
wanna
activity
know.
is the transition back to cooking outside more on the grill.
Oh,
Ah,
yeah. Are we talking
that's a good
breads or
one.
just everything?
Everything.
Everything? Yeah.
Do like so my wife and I are mostly vegetarian, so I'll do
Mhm.
like tempeh ribs with some vegetables, do some homemade burgers, do any variety of things. I have a charcoal, I got a pellet grill, got a
Ooh, super cool.
Blackstone, so you
Yeah.
name it.
Ooh.
Griddle and everything. So
Oh
you have
yeah.
it all.
That's
Very
my favorite
cool.
thing though, is like, oh, it's nice to stand outside
Nice
now.
enough
I'll
to
do
hang
this.
out outside. That's a good one. Yeah, that is kind of a rite of passage. Love it.
Right.
Alexis,
How about
I know
y'all?
you've got something like
You have to have
hopefully
something.
that does not involve plants. I know this is stressful for you. I mean, Brett just nailed it.
I would say the thing that I wish maybe we'll put it this way. Something that I enjoy that I wish I could do more, but it happens when my season is crazy. Like the best time of year to do it is also the most intense year for farming, or time of the year for farming is fishing. So
Oh, okay.
we have a bass boat, and so this time of year is great crappie fishing. Right when the dogwoods bloom, the crappie fish are biting is the rule of thumb there. So they are. I like all types of fishing, but if I wish I could do it more, but yeah. Oh well, I
So
try.
is it that you're often doing your thing in the with the farm
Yeah,
and
I got
Tyler goes
planned
fishing?
stuff to do. Yeah. Yeah. He always asks me, and I
Yeah.
always say, maybe if I get stuff done today. And he goes, so you're not
Never.
going? And I go,
So
well,
yeah.
we'll see.
So you've not committed right away. So
Yeah.
but yeah, that
Sometimes
is
I
fun
commit right
time.
away. And then he goes, oh, yeah, by the way, it's going to be 30-mile-per-hour winds and it might
Never
rain. And
mind.
I go, never mind.
No
I don't want to
thanks. And it's
go.
gonna be
Yeah.
I
cold
wanted
and
to enjoy
miserable.
myself. Sorry, I should have
Well,
clarified
see,
that.
yeah, I wanted to enjoy myself. And now, since we've been married, I don't have to go just to go anymore. I don't have to prove myself. I used to
Yeah.
go when it was like
You've
Yeah.
20
already signed the
degrees,
pact and
You
and
everything.
you
Yeah.
got him now,
I
so
You
got him
got him.
now. So
You've
I
already
don't want
made
to.
that
You have,
catch. You've
but
made the
You
big
got
catch.
that fish on the hook.
okay,
Yes, exactly.
fine.
Landed him.
No, that one's
Landed
in the
him.
live well.
Ooh, it's in the live well,
Oh.
keeping him alive.
Keeping him
So
in. He's in the freezer right
So
now.
threatening.
I, I'm impressed with the diversity I'm hearing. We learned lots about sports
Made me think of
and
like the Saw
fishing, which is
movies.
also a sport. Yeah. The live
The
well.
live well.
Live
Yeah.
well, straight
Kind
into
of
the
afraid
freezer
to
after
look in your
processing.
freezer
What
now.
was your what was your
We get the
answer, Ray?
electric fillet knife out.
Oh man, it's kind of like an escape room. There's a little challenge to the live well. You know, it puts the lotion on
An
its bass or
unsolvable
whatever.
Oh.
escape room.
Yeah, I tell you.
Where do you think I get my imitation crab from, guys?
Yeah, the live well.
Mm.
I don't know.
Soylent
So
Green is people.
good one.
All
I like the
right.
spring.
Well,
Springtime's
we
such
are
a fun
Wait,
talking
what was
time.
about.
Ray's answer?
Yeah.
Did Ray have an
Yeah.
answer about
Ray.
spring?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's not technically related to plants, but I do. And Brett and I started a little discussion before we started recording. Is I do like to take walks, especially in the spring, because, well, it's springtime. I'm not going to mention the plant aspect, even though spring ephemerals, very good reason. But I love to hike, and it's the transition, the weather, the fact that bugs aren't out yet is a huge bonus because that deer flies are the bane of my existence. So yeah, I like to get out even more in the springtime. Good times.
Mhm.
Good times.
Mhm. But you know what's not a good time in the spring?
What?
What?
Jessica, what's not
Future
a good time
fluctuation?
in the spring?
Frost and freeze. Freeze
That
and
Late
frost.
spring,
You
especially.
will
is
not
that
put
Yes.
me in the
Marvel
cooler.
characters? Frost and Freeze?
Right? Sounds like
Frozone.
Right?
Frozone. You're
Yeah.
on the
Those
Incredibles.
things
Where's
those
my
things
super
are
suit?
not fun. They're not
Yeah,
fun
they.
from a commercial standpoint, from a homeowner standpoint,
No.
or I mean, I guess some people like I was talking at work, like we've just recently had 2 back to back, as Alexis mentioned at the beginning, sans or whatever we we said.
Sans
Whatever it is.
freeze.
Freeze. Um, and I definitely was like, I gotta go home and cover things. And some of my
Mhm.
coworkers were like, "A what? Like, why are you covering?" So if you are definitely a plant person
Mm.
at all, you are high alert for these late. I guess late now. Frost freezes, maybe
Mhm.
not really late
Yeah,
still,
it's definitely
but
late for a freeze. I would say it's
freeze
not too late in our area
for
of Kentucky,
frost.
Quick
central Kentucky. It's not too late for a frost. We kind of expect those through the
quick
beginning of May.
clarification on the difference.
Above freezing, below freezing is how
Mhm.
I think there's technically temperature differences, but that's again, I'm a big rule of thumb person. So
Okay. So like
In
the 30,
general.
32.
right.
Okay.
32
Yeah.
and above is a frost, and below that is considered a
Yeah.
freeze.
It's
And then
like
There's also
below,
like
like,
hard freezes
it's
and
like
not hard
28.
yeah.
freezes.
It's like once it hits 28,
Yeah.
and then it's,
And
and that's
duration.
the
Yeah.
duration of
Yeah.
that is when you get into those really hard freezes that
I
Mhm.
start warning
cause
people.
that covering doesn't even help.
Yeah.
I mean, I start warning people at 30, usually 36 or 35. I will put out some information because even at those temperatures, because of thermal inversions and all the stuff we'll try not to get too technical on, at ground level, at an average air temperature of 35, I mean, it's still, you're going to get some issues. So I start to think about putting out some information, giving people as a heads up around 36 degrees and letting them know, because once you get really close to the ground for things like strawberries, it can still be at freezing, even though,
Right.
higher up, measurement at breast height, maybe 35 degrees and maybe 32 on the ground. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort
And
of triggers things.
you never, and so like where we had these two back to back, I covered some stuff both nights. And the first night, like we didn't have like a frost with it. But then last
Mm.
night we did. So I was glad that I still
Yeah.
covered. Um, I didn't cover everything that we had in our yard. I covered a
What is it?
perennial plants,
Yeah, what are the things that you are covering, and what's the hierarchy of this one gets covered first, and then from
right?
there?
So, definitely like farm wise, when we did have strawberries, it would have been an extremely
Yes.
stressful 48
Yeah.
hours of
Even if there's
covering,
no blooms or anything.
right?
Yeah.
For those guys. But for my house, we haven't been there that long, and I've just really started getting like some new perennials in and established. So there was one that I purchased last year that I was really excited about. That was just a little stick last year, and it's kind of exploded already. So I definitely wanted to cover that one versus some other perennials. I kind of just weighed like, I can get catmint anywhere if something happens with that one, or,
Yeah.
and
Catmint
then
cannot be hurt. It will be back in
yep,
some
it'll
form
be
or
back.
fashion. Yeah.
But then we had planted some rhubarb last
Oh,
year,
fun.
and we had a drought at the end of the year, and I made sure to water that rhubarb, and so we were excited to see that 3 of the 4 plants we planted have already like popped up and were growing good, so I made sure to cover them. And I've trained my son so well because he this morning was like, we have to check the rhubarb. We have to get out there and make sure it's okay. Um, but I was glad I did put those covers over that because this
Mhm.
morning I definitely had a frost out there
Mhm.
versus, the day
Yeah,
before it just got
you
really
say
cold.
covers. You've mentioned both covers for home situations, and
Mhm.
then you've mentioned like strawberries that you mentioned covers. Can we take a
Yeah.
little dive into, because that's the most typical scenario I hear about is covering things.
Yeah. And
Can you talk more about that?
yeah, and Alexa can jump in too with her with commercial wise, but like with strawberry situation, we're usually using like a remay cloth, a frost
Hmm.
protection cloth that can help it by a couple of degrees, keep that radiating heat in and also that frost off. And keeping in mind having something there as a barrier between the plants and the cloth so they don't touch if you have that harder frost on there to hit those plant leaves and could damage. And then for at home, I have just used, as what you see a lot of people do, towels. We used a big tablecloth to stretch across like our rhubarb plants last night, just to keep them, keep that frost, off of the top of those leaves. Something you want to avoid is using plastic.
Mhm.
Hmm.
That and especially like you don't want to leave it and then walk away and that sun come
Yeah.
out heats it up and you can actually kind of fry some
Mhm.
things and it's not a good not a good combo. um and then still just getting those, removing everything um in the morning unless those cold temperatures are holding for a
Mhm.
Yeah.
longer period of time
Or the
because
sun doesn't come
yep.
out,
I
like,
know some of the
sometimes the
commercial coverings, yeah, you can leave some of those on depending, there's like
Mhm.
2 or 3, well, more than 3 common weights
Mhm.
with different, thermal qualities,
Yeah.
but some of those you can leave on, but I've heard commercial growers talk a lot about their trigger point for removing things if it gets above 50 degrees under there, and if the weather's not supposed to be too cold, like, it reaches a certain temperature, you wanna kinda start thinking about commercially removing those, especially
Mhm.
those heavier weight materials are pretty incredible. I don't see them a lot, but I mean, they'll give up to 10
Ag 50
degrees.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is 6 to 10 degrees, which is huge
It makes a big
advantage.
difference.
But
Yeah.
it
We
also
talk
traps
about
heat under there. Yeah.
Yeah, we have an episode if you're interested in this, maybe after you've seen what frost and freeze can do if you're in Kentucky or other areas. Even we've got an episode called Frost Protection for Garden and Landscapes, and it aired March 31st of last year. So that's season 2, episode 13.
Mm.
So maybe we can post a link to that if you're interested. But we go through like some weights and some more like nuances of
Yeah.
what to do, what not to do on that. But I think maybe we want to like focus on, all right, so we've had this, maybe you covered, maybe you didn't, maybe you covered and still have damage, which I think I've got some plants that, the plant is going to live, but I'll probably lose the bloom on, even with covering. So maybe thinking about like, what are the steps? How long are we going to see, like, until we see damage? Are we going to see it immediately? Or are we going to see it later into the spring? Because I think
That's the big rule, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big rule. I mean, I'm sure you guys have your own rubric of making decisions on these things, but my number one rule that I tell homeowners is, that's a great point, Alexis, is wait. Give it time, because it's hard to assess the damage given the
Right.
plant, the severity of the temperature, and all of this. You just can't tell what you need to address until you give that plant time. I mean, it's early in Kentucky. The plants are going to break out and they're going to be growing, for the most part, very quickly. You're going to see that damage better later on, and you're going to be able to better address that potential damage if you give it some time, because right now you just don't know, do you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you like know if it's a more herbaceous
You'll
plant.
see that it's just melted. Yeah.
Yeah, or you'll see but we call it in peonies, and you could use this term in a lot of plants, but you'll hear it a lot in like peony production, bud blast, which can mean that you it just usually it's referring to the cold. Sometimes it refers to like disease killing the bud. We call it bud blast, but usually the first trigger is that the bud has a damage from cold, and then you get a secondary pathogen that moves in. And so people, might say, oh no, it's from botrytis. And you're like, well, originally it was probably from cold damage. But you're not really wrong either way.
I know in the fruit tree world, we split a lot of buds. Is that what you guys do in the floral world too? Do you take a knife and like split buds to assess the color, dark color versus normal green color? Do you guys do that a lot in the floral world? We do that in the fruit world. It
I
tends
don't
to be
have
more
that
common.
knowledge, but you might have
gotcha.
like a big producer.
I didn't know.
You throw in
Yeah.
You're saying it
20,000.
as an assessment technique,
As an
right?
assessment
Not
technique,
like a
mid-winter, not
management
even
technique.
springtime, but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
As
I
an
was going to ask
assessment
if you
technique.
split the bud, does that give you a perfectly pre-cut
I know. I
apple
was
that
like,
you
I
can package?
don't. Yeah,
later in the
that makes
season,
sense.
yeah.
No, usually with a lot of florals, if you'll know pretty quickly whether or not it's going to be, productive.
Alexis, you bring up when you start talking about florals, a question that I already received today was about are like my peonies going to survive? Because they were up so high already, but they don't have buds on them yet. Versus like I have a patch of tulips that already had some open, some were not open. Like, what do you normally tell people with that?
I also had some calls from some CCD teammates that were like, what do I cover? What do I do? And so peonies that have large buds, even the small buds, I wouldn't have worried about. Like as an example, plants that have a more swollen bud that means they're closer to opening. That means they're more susceptible. They're not as, they're not as immature and ready to fight off the the weather. And so peonies that are just up with no buds, unless they were newly planted this past fall, even then I wouldn't there'd be no worry for me on that. I always tell people peonies grow in Alaska. Like they have a huge peony production in Alaska. The thing with peonies is that they can't get cold after they get nice big swollen buds. Prior to that, they are super cold hardy. And if they're immature anyways, you really don't want them to flower. So if they lose their, for whatever reason, they lose those buds, they just did the debudding for you. But like lilacs could be pretty similar. If the flower is open, if a tulip is open or colored up and about to open, it's very susceptible versus.
I've heard the color thing before, Alexis. It's
color
interesting.
Crack.
They said if you're showing color, you're showing vulnerability as far as the temperature goes. Is that so? That's true then. Okay.
Yep. Color. Yeah, we call that color crack. Is it at
Gotcha.
color crack stage?
I think the same
That's
is
what
true
they'll
of an
ask
apple
you.
blossom. As it starts to show what we call pink stage, the
Mm,
further that those buds go along, those fruit buds, the less hardy they are to a
mhm,
point to where there's already fruit on there. Then it starts to go the other way again. But
mhm.
yeah, so that's universally
I'm
true.
learning all kinds of new terms. There's color crack, bud blast. I always thought of bud blast as hanging out and having a good time with your friends.
Having a big time. I like it. I like
Uh,
it.
you might use that term. We don't use
I'm
that
having a
with
bud blast
you.
right now, you guys.
Yeah, we're with our
Aw.
buds, man. Yeah. Instead of true
Gross.
leaves, maybe it'd be real buds or something like that. Yeah. Color
That's
buds.
pretty cute.
Well, Ray, you mentioned the fruit tree thing, and that is one, like, as far as on the commercial scale and at in any scale really, anybody who has fruit trees, this is a key stressful time of year for that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you watched or sorry, if you watched or listened to our previous episode, you can watch us on YouTube or listen to us on anywhere you get your podcast about pruning. Um, you know, in essence, the late winter weather comes along. It doesn't prune off the branches, but it can knock off all those buds. And
Yeah.
surprise, surprise, flowers in general are the reproductive cycle of a plant, and they give rise to fruit. Fruit is the thing that we generally want from our fruit trees, and so those buds, which come out on fruit trees before a lot of the leaves do,
Yeah.
this is like prime time for them to
Mhm.
potentially get knocked off. This is why
And
we only have peaches, once
mhm,
every, 2 or 3 times every 10 years or so, is what I've
mhm.
heard people say before. It's because these frosts come and knock these buds off. Was there any conversation with any of the orchard
Yeah.
folks that you?
I've been visiting with them even 3 weeks ago. We were walking through. I think it was a field of contender peaches, which is one of our better cold hardy varieties commercially. And even those being one of the more cold hardy peaches, maybe seeing 2 viable buds out of every 10, and that was not from late season fluctuations. That was just simply from cold weather,
Mm.
back in the winter.
Mm,
So I really worry. I don't know what the current situation is. I need to visit with our orchard guys again, but it was not very encouraging for peaches. So we start monitoring these things even midwinter, because the extreme cold temperatures. If you get down below a certain temperature for certain crops like peaches that are very sensitive to that, you can lose the fruit production. But apples, much better. I mean, they'll go -4, -10 as long as they're in tight cluster, and no problem. But now once they start to open up, I mean, a typical freeze that may hurt some of the plants Alexis talked about at 32 degrees are going to hurt those plants, and they don't start to get tougher until you actually have fruit set. And
Mhm.
when they start to have fruit on them, it gets a little bit better. They're more resistant to the cold. You may have frost cracking, have a frost ring on the fruit, but you won't have complete loss of the fruit until you get, you know, pretty low in temperature again. And there's ways of calculating that. You can say at this temperature for this duration, there's 10% fruit loss. There's ways of kind of looking into the crystal
science?
ball there. Science, yes, and historical data. But it's interesting that when we're talking about these reproductive structures, these flower structures, it's really interesting at what temperature and the duration of that temperature that you get losses. And
Mhm,
fruit trees, for example, you asked Brett, I mean, they kind of go through this cycle of being, not very vulnerable to pretty vulnerable to back again being more hardy
Mhm.
once they have fruit set on there. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it just a real quick plug. So, Alexis and I work with this for the Center for Crop Diversification, and we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page as well. But if you go over on Facebook, we shared a post back on April 6th, I think, and it has it's a post from our colleagues who with the fruit extension team, University of Kentucky fruit extension team,
mhm.
where they shared some pictures of the buds of different types of fruit, the fruit buds, flower buds, at different stages and with temperatures showing, at for instance, on there's apricots here. You guys say apricots or apricots?
Apricots, I
Apricots.
guess. Yeah.
Apricots.
A-
Divided. I normally would say apricots, but I said apricots because I thought it made me sound fancier for you all.
It is pretty fancy. I like that.
Apricot feels a little more, down
Common.
home. But I would say apricots. Anyway, so apricots, when the bud is just swelling, if it can get down to 15 degrees, and that will only trigger like a 10% kill. So 10% of the
Yeah.
buds will maybe be killed at 15 degrees. Just a little bit more open than that, which is this fifth stage that they describe here as tips separate. At 20 degrees, you'll get a 10% kill. And then as it moves along, you can see that a warmer and warmer temperature is still dangerous the more and more that it opens, and even to the point where you have green fruit. If it gets down to 25, you will have a 90% kill, even with green fruit in apricot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
apricot, I'm code switching now. So
My
anyway, there's
in-laws
just some
have one of
pictures to
those,
kind of.
and
What's that?
I was just saying my in-laws have one of those, and it's beautiful flowering, but they've never gotten fruit off of it, and
Yeah, those are tough crops, and some of the
yep.
absolute most sensitive, and some I need to catch up with some of our, one of our newest orchard in Bourbon County. They did something this year. I think they use fans to
Mm.
help, mix air basically to take a very complex process and distill it down. But to avoid this process where cold air sinks and warm air rises. They were trying to blend the air. I need to catch up with them to see how they did with that. I'm very, very excited and interested because commercially, there's all sorts of things that you can do. And that's one of the methods that not newer methods. It's been around for a long time, but it's newer to Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
But you can use fans to sort of on a very still, clear night. You get these temperatures inversions where warm air rises, and if there's no clouds, and no wind to mix that air, then cold air really settles, warm air really rises. And what you do then is you bring in something like fans and actually mix the air, the microclimate around the orchard. But I'm really interested. Now, that's obviously a commercial advanced sort of technique. It takes a very specialized fan system to do that. But super interesting when Jessica mentioned just putting a blanket over plants. You're going to get some protection. And on the commercial side, you're doing all these advanced things like using fans or smudge pots or irrigation to release energy through icing. I mean, there's all these methods, but it's all playing on the same principles, of temperature and the type of cold that you have.
Yeah.
Alexis, you mentioned a couple of terms there is really interesting to
It's
me
literally
early on.
thermodynamics for
Yes.
horticulturists.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you can go pretty deep on that, but it's fascinating. And you mentioned covering, Jessica. I know that Alexis, mentioned, and we talked a lot about that, the different types of coverings and stuff. And we've already covered that last year. Did you say in March of last year,
Yep.
Alexis?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've got some info on like the doing of it. I guess
Yeah.
I know people start to panic right after
Mhm.
a month or so. Sometimes even it's like if it's initial and you see it the next day or within the next week, usually
Yeah.
you can say, oh, it's because of the frost or freeze. But there
Mm-hmm.
are situations I think out there where you'll see remnants of damage, a month later, and you're like, what
Mm-hmm.
happened? What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And I just kind of wanted to like think about maybe what those were, point them out to people so that they don't panic if they see it and just be like, I've killed it. What's happening? But like, I kind of immediately think of like crepe myrtles or things that are do survive here. Figs, they do survive here, but maybe they won't fruit, maybe they won't bloom, or maybe a bunch of it will get killed back to the ground, and people might not notice it because it's not super leafed out yet and
Mhm.
for another month or so. Or they don't well, figs, it's the opposite. It's usually in the fall that we see a problem. But yeah, I just what other things can you guys think of
I
That we can do.
that you see that kind of
well,
issue
Oh,
on?
some just kind of a random thing, which we do have like a kind of a little publication on it, is when I first started an extension, somebody brought in a very distinct looking apple that had a ring around the center, and it was like,
yeah.
what's going on with this apple? I have several that are on my tree this way, and it was from like frost damage, but it was
Yeah.
like
Frost rings.
frost rings that were showing up on the actual fruit of it, and you wouldn't think that's where you would end up seeing it at, right? More the like you would think
Yeah.
of like the tender, like the leaves or the tender growth, but it was a completely mature, and I think they're still like fine to eat, right? They just look really funky on the
So
outside.
is that like when the fruit is small, the
Mhm.
bottom of it gets damaged, and then it's growing out from that
Uh-huh.
Yes.
that tip.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, from what I
Wow,
understand.
that's crazy. I never
It's a
Yeah.
thought of
perfect
that.
ring around
It's a
the
perfect
blossom end
ring.
of the apple. Yeah.
Yep.
It's the blossom end, yeah.
Whoa.
But it'll be and you can pick that out in orchards everywhere, and once you see
Brett's
it, Brett,
brain.
the bad thing, Brett, is once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and you will point it out to people that don't
Yeah.
wanna hear about it. All of your family and friends, you're gonna be like, "Oh, they had a
They
late
will be
season
used to it.
frost
I would
this
say
year."
90% of what I said is me pointing things out to people who don't want to hear about it.
But that's a great
They're like,
telltale
"Oh, yeah,
sign. You can read the
cool."
orchard with that one. You can read
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
orchard with that one.
The
I'm
Huh.
trying to think
other
what are
ones I'm
some other
thinking
things.
about are
Yeah.
sometimes the flower isn't, of whatever it is, isn't completely dead, but it is a little bit deformed. And so what is it, Jessica, help me? Is it some of the stamens or some of the pistils will
Uh-huh.
die out. And
It'll
so,
be a
you,
blackish color and
yeah. And so what that means, you don't get full fertilization
Yeah.
for the fruit, or if it's the flower, the flower is usually already formed in that bud. And so it might come out like kind of lopsided or maybe a little twisty looking. And that might, if it's peonies, for example, like the ones that I covered on mine that I still think got hit a little bit, they're still pretty tight in bud. And the ones that did make it might, not bloom for another several weeks, and they might be kind of wonky looking. And so petals missing, maybe they're
Mhm.
smaller, maybe the centers are kind of black on them. The petals are
Yeah.
okay. So there's a bunch of things like that where if you forget that you had this like freezer frost, a month ago, you might look at them and say like, oh no, I've got a disease, or I haven't watered
right.
enough, or something like that. And so that's a good one. Do you all remember? I think I've talked about this before, but I guess it was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, we had that like post Derby Day frost, or like on Derby Day, like
Mhm.
freeze more
Was
like
that
it. It was
2020 or was that
It
before
was
then?
no,
during COVID, I thought
was
that
it
we
during
had.
COVID?
Yeah.
This
I
is
know
the
in
thing that kills
2020 we
that
had a
kill
big
all the
one.
boxwoods.
Yeah, I'm still
Um,
dealing with those questions.
no,
That's a different one.
winter. That was winter.
It's
Okay, you
over
guys are
That
with.
was a
thinking of
winter
the
winds,
earlier one.
no
Yeah.
snowfall issue. No, this one
Yeah.
was like everybody put their annuals in like they were
Yep.
supposed to at the right time. They did everything by the book, me. And and then we get this like freeze frost warning and had to
Yes.
cover everything. And this is like a great example, was like a something that nailed it into me. And that's what I tell people when we say it's better to be late than too early. In this case, wasn't too early planting, but that really, really slowed my plants down. And so the plants I put in even 2 weeks after that, like I kept notes, the plants I put in 2 weeks after that, and these ones had already been in the ground for, a week. So basically they're 3 weeks older, outgrew the first ones that went in because
Right.
they
Yeah,
were
the
so
conditions are just
stunted.
so much better.
Yeah, they were so
Right.
stunted. And so you may think, I need to feed them more, or I need to, what have I done wrong? A lot of the times it's not necessarily what have you done wrong.
Just
It's
Mother
just out of your
Nature.
control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that because that's when we had dipped, our toes into making hanging baskets, and
Mm-hmm.
I put plastic down in my house where we lived at the time, and I hauled in all of these hanging baskets for the night,
Yeah.
and the other ones just had to do my best, cross my fingers and cover and try to protect them, and because you're right, it was, like, the right
Mhm.
time to be planting.
Yeah,
N
yeah. It was like
Here in Kentucky, we use, the Kentucky Derby, which is what date typically? I
the
forget what.
first
First
weekend in
Saturday in
May.
May.
First
First
But
weekend in
Saturday in
May.
May.
yesterday, our master gardeners corrected me. They stopped. I've referenced Derby Day, loosely as a, indicator of when to plant things or get baskets or whatever. And one of them said, no, they said that's outdated. They said Mother's Day is the new Derby Day. And that just hit me. I'm like, it's May the
Well,
11th. And I'm like,
no.
They
for
Mother's
can't.
Day
homeowners.
is Ohio's version of Derby
Too late.
Days.
Yeah.
So
We're
that's
talking about from
Conservatively,
a
not.
yeah.
safety
We just moved
standpoint.
up zones. Are they from northern
But
Kentucky or
maybe they're
something?
suggesting that the climate
The
variability
fluctuations is what they
makes
were
Mm.
it
addressing.
makes it more of a
They
like if
said
you want
that
to be
it's too
conservative.
unpredictable.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
homeowners, yes, from a
Interesting.
homeowner's but
Well,
standpoint.
we're
So we
all
had this
wild
whole
cards up in
discussion.
here, so
I'm from
we're
Louisville,
actually
so
pushing
it's
it.
always Derby Day.
Yeah.
Always Derby Day.
Derby Day is my standard reference point, but I mean, they really got into a discussion with one another, and I just
Good
stood
for
back and
them.
beheld it. And they were like having this big thing, like, "Oh, we had this killed and that killed," and but I mean, yeah, it was interesting watching them have that discussion. The most interesting thing is that it was on their mind.
Mm,
That they've taken some, they planted things, and then a few of them had lost things over the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
yeah,
but
it
it was
happens.
interesting.
It happens. Buy like at least 2 of everything is the rule of thumb here. But
We're talking about plant damage, right? That's the heart of this conversation. And to me, when I go out and I assess plants, I immediately, when I see that there's damage on a boxwood or a succulent or whatever, I immediately go into plant care and taking care and removing stress from that plant so that I can give it the best chance to recover. And that is the way that I deal with like freeze damage, because you want to make sure that the plant doesn't have any undue stress. You want to be careful not to dump a bunch of fertilizer on it. I caution homeowners about that, especially with the woodies. That's sometimes going to work against you, not for you. But really, it's just about generally removing stress, assessing damage later on, and giving that plant the best opportunity to recover. And that's kind of how I deal with that. It's not a silver bullet, but that's just my general way when I'm working, especially with homeowners. It's different commercially, but that's kind of my takeaway for this messaging is that prune at the proper time once you see the complete damage. And that's more on the woodies. Alexis had some great comments for more of the succulent,
yeah,
more of the herbaceous stuff.
and patience. We're going to leave you with that.
Not
Patience.
impatience, but
Be
patience. Yes.
patient with your plants. They
Yes.
will
Yes. Yes. Yes.
recover. Just give them a little extra TLC,
Yes.
and they'll be okay. So if you want more
Absolutely.
info on that, check out the show notes for any of the publications. We've got some info that we can post there, as well as you can follow Kentucky Fruit. If you can't find it, go to the Center for Crop Diversification Facebook page, and you can find a link to them there, as well as all the other cool stuff that we do. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Hort Culture Pod. That's in the show notes as well. Shoot us an email, drop us a note. What do you want to hear? And that will be, we do get those. We do look at them. And if we didn't respond, it's because it went to a spam, and we are sorry. Please send it again. Give us 5 stars. But we appreciate you guys being here today, and we hope you will join us next time. Have a great one.